Hi, my name is Melissa Adkins, and welcome to my action plan for implementing a social media presence in your public library. Currently, I used a suburban public library serving around 26,000 patrons as a model, but they had virtually no social media presence whatsoever. So the first thing we need to talk about is why social media? Why is it so important? Why should every library have at least some sort of online presence? Well, the number one thing you can do with a social media presence is expand your reach. Just to give you a quick overview of some of the major players in social media, Facebook currently has over 800 million users, while Pinterest has approximately 70 million. More than 1 billion users use YouTube each month, and Twitter has 232 million active monthly users. So that's a lot of numbers, but what does it really mean? What it means is that when you engage with your patrons online, they're able to share events and news and interesting stories about your library with their friends. So if you have 10 users sharing your information with 100 friends, that extends your reach exponentially and can really make a great difference to your library traffic. Another thing to remember is that it's free. Another important reason to engage with social media is creating and using social capital. Now, social capital sounds like a really fancy term. All it really means is that you're listening to, engaging with, and doing favors for your patrons. Every time you share one of their statuses or photos, you're really making them feel tied to the library, which means later on when you need a favor, such as promoting a library event or maybe doing some fundraising or even volunteering, they're going to feel like they're really part of the community. And that ties into another great benefit of social capital, which is that it generates greater levels of trust and is generally associated with more cohesive and healthy communities, as established by several studies. So if social media is such a great medium, then why do so many libraries shy away from using it? Well, the number one thing is that it's not really a priority. With staffing shortages and funding cuts, sometimes it can be very difficult to see social media as something that absolutely needs to be taken care of. There's also a lack of continuing engagement. Even if a public library starts out with great intentions, sometimes you can lose enthusiasm or dry up your sort of creative well about what sort of content you need to post. There are some simple solutions that can help you overcome these problems. Number one, set goals and have a plan. Having a plan will make you focus and make you understand why you're engaging with social media. They don't need to be elaborate goals. Even establishing a number of likes you would want or hoping to get a certain amount of shares for an event would really help you feel like you're using social media in a way that actually matters to your library. Another thing you can do is create a team. Don't rely on one person to manage all of your social media content. It can be very overwhelming, and also take away a staff member from important other duties. By creating a team, not only do you split up the workload, but you give people a chance to collaborate and brainstorm, which can foster a real sense of teamwork among your staff members. So let's talk about a couple of the juggernauts of social media. Although there are many platforms too that you're really going to want to think about utilizing are Facebook and YouTube. Facebook is the #1 rating social media platform online right now. What can you use this for? Well, promoting events is a big deal on Facebook. You can actually create separate event pages for different things going on in your library. Not only can you give your patrons the ability to invite other people they think would be interested, but you can actually let them RSVP, which gives you a heads up ahead of time if you're going to have an unusually high number of people coming, or if maybe turnout is lower than you anticipated. You can also use it to share links and photos or start conversations. Facebook is a very easy way to engage in two-way interaction with your patrons. It's really going to make them feel like they have a voice at the library. It's also important to note that 41% of the US population already has a personal Facebook page, which means that by creating a page for your library, you're going where your patrons already are. YouTube is a video sharing site. And the interesting thing about this is that it's going to give maybe your library staff the chance to see some patrons virtually, where patrons maybe they're usually behind the scenes and they don't get a chance to interact with those staff members. You can share event reviews or book reviews, or even how-to videos. A lot of library services are more obscure and sometimes patrons don't even know how to access them. Posting how-to videos is really going to give your library an edge when it comes to promoting library services. So what are some examples of best practices using these platforms? New York Public Library is a great example of the way to use a Facebook page. Their page is clean and inviting, and they post content all the time, but it's very different. It's not always about library news or their own library. So for example, 25 series to read if you love the Hunger Games, with a link to a separate article. Now this is book related, but it's not something that necessarily is in your face promoting the library. They also make sure to post links and content that remind patrons that they're part of a larger community. Whole Foods is hiring for a new store in Brooklyn, with a link to apply. So by reminding people that they care about their patrons outside of library use, they're really banking that social capital. The New York Public Library page has almost 200,000 likes. So you can imagine, with that many people that are seeing their content and sharing with their friends, they really have expanded their reach to as far as it can go. And that really gives them the ability to engage with more people and draw more people into the library building itself. So some tips and tricks for getting off the ground with establishing a strong social media presence. The number one thing to remember is that social media is not just for releasing news or information. It's supposed to be fun. If you're going to be cut and dry all the time, people aren't going to be interested in interacting with you online. They could get that at a flyer or by making a phone call to the library. Make sure that you're posting different content and that you're not always taking yourself too seriously. Again, a reminder, another tip is to know what you want from your social media presence. Not all of the platforms are going to work for what your library needs. You're going to have some periods of trial and error, but if you know from the onset what it is that you're hoping to establish with your online presence, it's really going to help you foster greater content development and more interesting status updates. And finally, don't be afraid to go old school. Even though we're utilizing new technology, sometimes people that are already in the building aren't going to be aware of your online presence. So don't be afraid to post flyers or put things up in the library itself that mention that you're starting to establish a social online presence. Are there any questions or comments?
Yeah, you mentioned early on about integrating social media into libraries and about setting goals, but you also mentioned how those goals can be measured. How does a staff go about doing that?
That's a really good question. A lot of the platforms for social media actually have their own analytics built right in. Facebook is a great example of this. Facebook actually has something called Facebook Insights, which can give you daily, weekly, or even monthly updates about your demographics, how many people are sharing your statuses, how many people are liking your page, and that can give you a better overall sense of who your audience is and who you're reaching.
Okay, also, in your research, have you come across any instances? You mentioned, of course, it's free to use all these various services, which is great, but is there anything in your research that suggested some libraries implemented this and then actually found that there was a cost because they had to hire someone part-time or full-time to maintain these online services?
In the research I did not come across that particular scenario. However, some of them sort of preemptively address that by, one, recommending that you have a team so that nobody's getting bogged down in too much workload, and also making sure that you're not overextending your social media presence. But it is important to remember that there are a lot of great tools if people are having a hard time knowing what to do with their social media. There's online tutorials, other libraries offer workshops and suggestions, and again, a lot of the research I've done shows that there is a strong academic and scholarly background to teaching librarians and library science students about how to use social media properly. It's also important to remember that not everybody is going to use it in the same way. So what works for a large public library like New York Public Library is not necessarily going to work for a tiny bookmobile in the middle of nowhere. So you have to be willing to be flexible and not always expect unrealistic results from your social media presence. And that's everything I have for you today. Thank you for being here for my presentation.